A billionaire insults a waitress, calling her just a waitress. Until the next day, she walks into his business meeting as a powerful investor with a bank account balance of over $200 million. The ultimate revenge unfolds as she teaches him a lesson he'll never forget. Watch how arrogance meets humility, and a simple insult turns into a life-changing revelation. This is a story of power, respect, and the shocking truth that money isn't everything. Please like and subscribe to my channel for more stories like this. Lucas Grant walked into the elegant restaurant, his presence commanding the room as he made his way to the reserved table. His sleek black suit, perfectly tailored to his broad shoulders, glistened under the soft lights of the chandeliers. He was the definition of wealth, power, and confidence, and everyone in the room knew it. His dark brown eyes scanned the room, taking in the guests with a detached air, as if they were beneath him. With every step he took, people cleared the way, and all eyes turned towards him, some out of admiration, others out of envy. The restaurant staff, attuned to the needs of the rich, rushed to accommodate him, but Lucas didn't notice. He was too used to being treated like royalty, a man above the rest, a billionaire who demanded nothing short of perfection. Zoe had been working at this high-end restaurant for almost a year, and though she had learned to navigate the whims of the city's elite, she never got used to the way some of them looked down on her. She had always been the type to smile through the discomfort, to bear the weight of condescending comments with grace. It wasn't easy, but she did it because she needed the job. The tips helped pay the bills and keep food on the table, but they also came with a price. Each day she had to endure the insults, the dismissive gestures, and the occasional rude comment that came with serving the wealthy. She didn't mind the hard work, but the constant feeling of being invisible was beginning to wear her down. As Zoe approached Lucas's table, she greeted him with the customary smile. Her uniform was perfectly pressed, her hair neatly tied back, and her demeanor was calm and professional. But as soon as she arrived at his table, Lucas glanced up from his phone, his face flickering with annoyance. He tapped his fingers on the table impatiently, waiting for her to make her move. "What took you so long?" he muttered, barely looking at her. Zoe's smile faltered for a second, but she quickly recovered. "Sorry for the wait, sir," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "May I take your order?" Lucas stared at her for a moment, his gaze cold and dismissive. His eyes scanned her from head to toe, lingering on the simple black apron she wore, as if it were some kind of statement about her worth. "You're slow," he remarked sharply, his tone cutting through the air like a knife. "I didn't expect this kind of service from someone like you. You're just a waitress." The word stung more than Zoe had expected. She had heard insults like this before, but there was something about the way he said it, so dismissively, so carelessly, that made her feel smaller than ever. But she wouldn't let him see that. She couldn't, not in front of everyone. "I apologize, sir," she replied, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. As she walked away to place his order, she could feel the sting of his words still lingering in the air. She had been a waitress for a while now, and though she had dealt with rude customers, there was something different about this interaction. It wasn't just that he had insulted her. It was the way he had belittled her, as if her entire existence was defined by the role she played. "Just a waitress," he had said, as though that was all she was ever going to be. The thought gnawed at her, making it harder to focus on the task at hand. The meal continued in the same vein. Zoe refilled his water glass, her movements quick and efficient, but Lucas didn't acknowledge her. He was too busy scrolling through his phone, his face locked in a frown as he scrolled through emails or messages. The entire time, Zoe could feel the weight of his judgment. It was as if she was invisible, an insignificant part of the background to his lavish life. She did her job with the same professionalism she always did, but with each moment that passed, the weight of his insult grew heavier. When it was time for dessert, Lucas didn't even look at the menu before ordering. Zoe quickly brought it to him, placing it down on the table without a word. He barely glanced at it before pushing it aside, signaling that he was done. Zoe quickly gathered the plates, but when she returned with the check, there was no apology, no acknowledgement. Lucas had already signed the bill and left a note. Zoe picked it up with a tight smile, but when she looked at the receipt, her heart sank. The tip was barely half of what it should have been, but that wasn't the worst part. Beneath the total in bold, scrawling handwriting was the note, "Just a waitress. Learn to be quicker next time." Zoe felt her stomach twist in knots. She had dealt with rude customers before, but this was different. The sting of the words hit her harder than she expected. She knew that people like Lucas saw her as just a server, just a piece of furniture in the restaurant that existed only to cater to their needs. But this, it felt personal. As Zoe walked back to the counter, the humiliation of the note was too much to bear. She wanted to rip it up, throw it in the trash, but she couldn't bring herself to do it. It was a reminder of the world she lived in, a world where people like Lucas had everything, and people like her had to settle for scraps. Her hands trembled as she placed the receipt in the trash. But deep down, she swore that one day, she would show him exactly how wrong he was. The next day, Lucas arrived at his office, running late for a critical business meeting. His mind was still buzzing with the events from last night, how Zoe, the just a waitress, had dared to take her time serving him. He couldn't shake off the feeling of superiority he had over her, despite the strange discomfort her words had caused. He had always been the one who called the shots. That's how the world worked. People like him didn't need to waste time thinking about others. They didn't need to apologize. He had been the one in control, and he wasn't about to let some lowly service worker change that. As he entered the meeting room, he found the usual faces waiting for him, the company's executives and his top investors. They exchanged pleasantries, but Lucas didn't have time for small talk. The meeting was crucial, and he needed to impress the investors to secure their money for his next big project. The stakes were high. Without this deal, his company's future was at risk. As he settled into his chair, he glanced at the door, where an unexpected figure appeared. A woman walked in, her heels clicking against the polished floor as she stepped inside the room. She was tall, elegant, and commanding, dressed in a perfectly tailored designer suit that screamed success. Her confidence radiated off her as she entered the room, instantly capturing the attention of everyone present. Her presence was magnetic, impossible to ignore. But it wasn't just her demeanor that struck Lucas. It was something more. He recognized her face, those piercing green eyes. He blinked, trying to place her. Then it hit him. It was Zoe, the waitress from the night before. Lucas's jaw tightened, his surprise evident. He had not expected to see her here, and he certainly hadn't imagined she would be standing in front of him as someone important. The confusion on his face didn't go unnoticed by the room. The investors exchanged curious glances, clearly wondering who the woman was. Zoe smiled, her eyes gleaming with a sense of satisfaction. She held her head high, the epitome of poise and confidence, as if she had all the power in the room. "Remember me, Lucas?" she asked, her voice calm and controlled. "You called me just a waitress." Lucas's stomach dropped. His face flushed red with both embarrassment and confusion. He had tried to forget the interaction from the night before, but here she was, standing in front of him, reminding him of his arrogant dismissal. She wasn't just any waitress. She was someone who had clearly moved up in the world, and the fact that she was here, in this room, left him speechless. "Zoe," he stammered, his voice betraying his surprise. I didn't realize." Zoe cut him off with a smile, her eyes locking onto his. "Well, now you know." The room fell silent. Everyone was watching, sensing the tension between them. Zoe's presence had shifted the dynamic in the room, and it was clear that Lucas was no longer the one in control. He struggled to regain his composure as she took a seat at the head of the table, facing the investors with a quiet confidence. She glanced over at Lucas once more, her lips curving into a knowing smile. "I'm the one you'll be working with today, Lucas," she said softly. "I'm the investor you've been waiting for." Lucas's mind raced, trying to process the situation. She was an investor? The woman he had humiliated the night before was now here to decide his company's fate. It seemed impossible. His thoughts were interrupted as she spoke again. "I've been keeping an eye on your company, Lucas. I'm the founder of a tech startup," she said, her voice steady but firm. "A company that's worth over $900 million, the room gasped. No one had expected this. Lucas felt the walls close in on him, his previous arrogance now biting at his conscience. He had underestimated her. He had judged her based on her job, her role in the restaurant, not knowing that she was more than capable of running a multi-million-dollar enterprise. She wasn't just a waitress. She was a businesswoman. Zoe reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a tablet, connecting it to the screen at the front of the room. With a few taps, the numbers appeared on the screen for everyone to see. Her company's valuation, her recent acquisitions, and the staggering $200 million in liquid assets she had at her disposal. Lucas's eyes widened in disbelief. He started, but the words caught in his throat. "You called me just a waitress," Zoe reminded him again, her tone calm but filled with an undeniable authority. She didn't need to say more. The message was clear. Lucas had misjudged her, and now she was here to remind him of his mistake. The investors who had been skeptical of Lucas's business plan now shifted their attention to Zoe. They recognized the power she held in her hands, and they understood that she was the one who could make or break their company. Lucas swallowed hard, his pride wounded, but he couldn't deny the truth. He needed her investment. He needed her to save his company from the financial hole it was sinking into. And yet, there was a part of him that still struggled to admit that he had been wrong, that he had underestimated her in the most humiliating way possible. As the meeting continued, Zoe remained calm, her confidence never wavering. She spoke about her vision, her plans for the future, and the technology her startup was developing. She was sharp, intelligent, and commanding, and Lucas found himself struggling to keep up with her. He had always been the smartest person in the room, the one everyone listened to, but today he was just a man with a bruised ego, sitting in the shadow of the woman he had once dismissed so easily. The tension in the room was palpable, and Lucas could feel it weighing heavily on him as he tried to maintain his composure. His mind raced as Zoe spoke with such authority, outlining the immense potential of her company. The sharp, calculated way she carried herself sent waves of unease through him. She was no longer the woman he had belittled the night before. She was now a force to be reckoned with. He had expected her to be a small-time investor at best, but what he saw before him was a woman who had built something far more impressive than he could have ever anticipated. The numbers on the screen were staggering. Zoe's company was worth nearly $1 billion, and her liquid assets were more than most investors could dream of. Lucas's pride was bruised beyond repair. He had judged her based on her appearance and her job, but Zoe had proven him wrong at every turn. She wasn't just a waitress. She was an entrepreneur, a powerhouse in the business world. As the meeting progressed, Zoe's calm and assertive demeanor began to win over the investors. They seemed entranced by her vision, impressed by her ability to speak with such clarity and conviction. Lucas, on the other hand, was growing increasingly desperate. He had never felt this powerless before. His company was on the brink of collapse, and here was Zoe, someone he had dismissed, holding the keys to his future. Lucas tried to regain control, attempting to steer the conversation back to his business, but every time he opened his mouth, Zoe's presence seemed to overshadow him. She was the one everyone wanted to listen to now, and Lucas hated the feeling of being irrelevant in a room he had once dominated. But Zoe wasn't done. After presenting her company's impressive portfolio, she turned the conversation back to Lucas. Her eyes met his, and for the first time, he saw a glimmer of something more in them. a challenge. "Lucas," she said, her voice smooth and calculated, "I think it's time you saw what 200 million in liquid assets looks like." She reached into her bag once again, pulling out her phone and turning it towards the screen. The room fell silent, all eyes on her as the screen displayed her bank balance, $200,000. The figures flashed before Lucas's eyes, each zero more suffocating than the last. He couldn't take his eyes off the screen, his heart pounding in his chest. This wasn't just some investor with deep pockets. This was someone who could make or break him with a single decision. Zoe didn't say a word. She let the numbers speak for themselves. As the screen displayed her wealth, Lucas felt his stomach churn. He had never felt so small, so insignificant. There was no way around it. Zoe had more power than he ever would. The investors, too, were visibly stunned. They exchanged glances, realizing that the woman they had been so quick to overlook had more financial clout than most of them combined. For the first time in his career, Lucas felt the cold reality of his situation. His arrogance, his condescension, had led him to this moment, sitting across from the very woman he had mocked just a day ago. His desperation became apparent. "Zoe, I didn't mean to offend you last night," he stammered, his voice unsteady. "I was out of line. You have to understand, my company is in trouble. I need your investment. I'm offering you a stake in my company, a partnership. You can help me turn this around." Zoe's lips curled into a smile, but there was no warmth in it. It was the smile of someone who had the upper hand, who knew exactly what was at stake, and wasn't about to be swayed by empty apologies. "Lucas," she said, her voice calm but firm, "I don't think you understand." She paused for a moment, letting the silence linger in the air. The tension in the room was almost unbearable as everyone waited for her next words. "I didn't come here to invest in your company. I came here to show you something much more important. Character. The kind of character that you clearly lack. You see, I wasn't always in this position. I worked as a waitress because I needed to understand people like you. I needed to understand what it meant to serve others, to treat people with respect. I did it because I wanted to stay grounded." Her eyes locked with his, and for the first time, Lucas felt truly seen. She wasn't just talking about business. She was talking about life. "But you, Lucas," she continued, "you treat people like dirt. You think your wealth and your status mean that you can belittle others, that you can look down on people who serve you. That's not the kind of person I want to do business with." Her words hit him like a slap across the face, and for a brief moment, he couldn't find the words to respond. His pride had taken another hit, and this time it stung worse than before. Zoe had seen through him, exposed the man he was beneath the polished exterior. She had revealed his flaws, his arrogance, and the emptiness that lay within him, and there was nothing he could do to change it. "You called me just a waitress, Lucas," she said, her voice unwavering. "Well, I'm not just a waitress, and I'm not just here to make your life easier. I'm here to remind you that money isn't everything. It's not going to save you if you don't have the right character." The room was silent. Lucas's mind was spinning, the weight of her words crashing down on him. He had spent his entire life building his empire, accumulating wealth, but none of it mattered in this moment. None of it could change the truth that Zoe had just laid bare. She wasn't here to help him. She was here to show him that there was more to life than wealth, more to business than just making money. It was about respect, it was about character, and it was something Lucas had sorely lacked. The meeting room remained eerily silent as Zoe's words hovered in the air, leaving a cold, uncomfortable stillness. Lucas felt the weight of her rejection like a crushing blow to his chest. His mind scrambled, the reality of his situation hitting him harder than he could process. This wasn't how he had imagined the day would unfold. He had thought that with Zoe's investment, his failing company could be saved. But now she was rejecting him. Rejection wasn't something Lucas Grant was accustomed to. He was used to being the one in control, the one who called the shots. Everyone else followed his lead, and anyone who stood in his way had always been pushed aside. But here, in this room, Zoe had completely turned the tables. She was no longer the waitress he had mocked. She was the one with power, the one with leverage, and he was the one who was about to lose everything. Lucas's mind raced as Zoe stood up, calm and composed, closing her tablet with a soft click. She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. There was a quiet confidence in her demeanor, a certainty that sent a shiver down his spine. She was in control now, and Lucas was at her mercy. "I'm sorry, Lucas," she said, her voice soft but firm, "but I can't invest in your company." The words hit him like a slap across the face. He had worked so hard to get to this point. The sleepless nights, the endless meetings, the sacrifices. He had poured his soul into this company, and now it was all slipping away, all because of his arrogance. He looked at Zoe, his mind still processing what had just happened. "Zoe, please," he begged, his voice shaky with desperation. "You don't understand. My company needs this investment. It's going under. I've worked so hard. Please, you're the only one who can save it. You've got the power to make this work." His voice broke slightly, but he didn't care. He needed her to understand, to see how desperate he was. But Zoe didn't flinch. She stood there, her posture still impeccable, her eyes fixed on him with a calm intensity. There was no sign of sympathy in her gaze. If anything, there was a hint of disappointment. "I do understand, Lucas," she said, her voice unwavering. "More than you think. You're standing here, pleading with me because you've exhausted all your options. You're grasping at straws because you have no other choice. And that's exactly why I can't invest." Lucas's heart pounded in his chest. "Why not?" he demanded. "I've shown you everything. You've seen the numbers, the figures on the screen. You know how much I need this. I'm offering you a chance to be part of something big. You could be the one to turn it all around. Why can't you help me?" Zoe's expression remained unchanged. She shook her head slowly, as though Lucas's words were futile, meaningless. "Because your company isn't the problem, Lucas. You are. You think money will solve everything, but it won't. It never has. The way you treat people, your attitude, your arrogance, it's what's holding you back. You're so focused on the bottom line that you've forgotten the most important part of business. Respect." Lucas took a step forward, frustration boiling inside him. "What do you mean? You're saying my company doesn't deserve help because of how I treat people? I've built this from nothing. I've worked my ass off, and all I'm asking for is a chance. You don't understand. This isn't just a business deal. It's my life, my future." Zoe's gaze never wavered. She didn't seem moved by his desperation. "I understand perfectly, Lucas," she said, her voice as calm as ever. "I understand that you've built an empire on the backs of people you've belittled, people you've treated like they don't matter. I understand that you've gotten so caught up in your wealth and status that you've lost sight of what truly matters. And that's why I can't invest in you." Lucas's chest tightened. He had never thought about it that way. He had always seen himself as the one who deserved everything. He had earned it. He had worked for it. But Zoe was right. He had treated people like they were dispensable. He had never stopped to consider the impact of his actions, the way he had dismissed people like her as insignificant. The weight of her words pressed down on him, harder than any financial loss ever could. "I worked as a waitress, Lucas," Zoe continued, her voice steady. "Not because I had to, but because I wanted to understand people. I wanted to know what it meant to serve others, to listen, to treat people with respect, no matter who they were. That's something you've never understood. And that's why you're in the mess you're in now." Lucas stood frozen, his mind racing. He had always prided himself on being the smartest person in the room, the one who had all the answers. But now, in the face of Zoe's calm rejection, he realized how far off the mark he had been. He had built his empire on ego, on pride, and on the belief that money was all that mattered. But Zoe had shattered that illusion. She wasn't just rejecting him because of his failing business. She was rejecting him because of who he had become. And deep down he knew she was right. "I can't help you, Lucas," Zoe said, her voice softening just slightly. "Not because your company doesn't deserve help, but because you don't. Not yet. Maybe one day you'll understand that it's not about how much you have, but how you treat the people around you. Maybe then you'll start seeing what's truly important." She turned and walked out of the room, leaving Lucas standing there, his heart heavy with the realization that everything he had worked for, everything he had built, could never be fixed by money alone. Weeks passed since Zoe's rejection, and Lucas found himself in a downward spiral. His business was failing, and with each passing day the pressure mounted. He couldn't shake the feeling of humiliation, the echo of Zoe's words ringing in his ears. He had spent his entire life building an empire based on arrogance, pride, and the belief that money could solve everything. But now, in the face of this failure, he realized how wrong he had been. He had been blinded by his own success and the comforts of his privileged world. Zoe had seen through him, and it had crushed him. He thought back to their conversation, to how calm and composed she had been while rejecting him, to how she had made him face the reality of his own character. He had wanted to fight her, to convince her to invest, but deep down, he knew she was right. His attitude, his behavior, had brought him to this point, and now he had no one to blame but himself. In the weeks that followed, Lucas made a decision. He was going to change, not just for his business, but for himself. He realized that success wasn't just about making money. It was about treating people with respect, understanding their value, and recognizing that the relationships he had neglected were more important than any deal or acquisition. He reached out to those he had once belittled, apologizing for his behavior, asking for a second chance. He made it a point to show respect, not just to his employees, but to everyone he encountered. It wasn't easy. Old habits died hard, and there were times when his ego tried to take control. But Lucas knew that if he wanted to rebuild his life and business, he had to start by rebuilding his character. Zoe, on the other hand, was thriving. Her company continued to grow, expanding into new markets, acquiring competitors, and building a reputation for integrity and innovation. She didn't need to prove herself to anyone. Her actions spoke louder than any words ever could. But she hadn't forgotten Lucas. She had seen his transformation from a distance, watching as he humbled himself and began to treat others with the respect they deserved. It wasn't easy for her to forgive him completely, but she couldn't help but admire the steps he was taking to better himself. Zoe's company had outperformed Lucas's. She had acquired a rival company and outpaced him in every market. His company was struggling, but Zoe's had continued to grow, her integrity and vision setting her apart. Lucas saw this and it stung, but it also motivated him. He had learned a valuable lesson. Humility wasn't a weakness. It was a strength. The realization hit him hard. The very thing he had once mocked, being humble, being grounded, was the key to true success. It wasn't about the size of the bank balance. It was about the person you were and how you treated others. As Lucas watched Zoe's rise, he knew that he could never catch up to her in the business world until he caught up to himself. In time, Lucas publicly apologized for his past behavior, not just to Zoe, but to everyone he had ever wronged. It wasn't easy and it didn't change everything overnight, but it was a start. He began treating the staff at his company with more respect, encouraging a culture of kindness and understanding. Slowly but surely, Lucas rebuilt his company. It wasn't the same as it once was, but it was better. Zoe had become a symbol for him, not just of business success, but of personal growth. She was proof that no matter how much you had, it could all be taken away if you lost sight of what truly mattered. Lucas had learned that lesson the hard way, but he had learned it nonetheless. Zoe's message had sunk in deep, and while it had stung at first, it had ultimately shaped him into a better person, a better businessman. He would never forget her, not just for the investment she didn't make, but for the lesson she had taught him about respect, humility, and the true meaning of success.